Hey, grace and peace, Connected Church fam. This is Charles, and I am really excited to be back with you for another Connected podcast. The Connected podcast is the weekly Bible study for My Connected Church. Our website is myconnectedchurch.com. I am the founder and pastor here at My Connected Church, Charles Botts, and it is another Thursday evening. We're really excited to be back on with you this Thursday as we bring to a close the 3-week series, the deep dive we did on the book of Job, and took a real close examination at the three parts of the three sections of Job, if you can look at it that way. Section number 1 is that very peculiar, very strange, almost like a courtroom drama scene where we are given access to a meeting in heaven. God is meeting with his divine counsel. The Bible describes it as the sons of God came before his throne. And so among these council members is the Satan, the accuser. And the accuser is entering the scene, and God addresses the accuser. Where have you been? What have you been up to? And the accuser has been trying to bring cases, bring cases on people. And God offers up Job. And so we are really just kind of thrown into this very strange back and forth, this very strange dynamic between God and the accuser. And Job feels a little bit like the unwitting pawn that is caught in this sort of divine tug of war, this divine back and forth between God and the accuser. And so the first section kind of ends with the accuser trying to make the case that Job is only good, Job is only righteous because God gives him stuff. And if God took back all the stuff that he gave Job, then Job would curse God and be as unrighteous as any wicked man. And we come to the end of chapter 1 where Job has lost family and possessions, and we get the great quote, "Naked I came into the world, and naked I shall go out. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. The Lord's name will be blessed." And so it appears so far that Job is a stand-up guy, that God's characterization of Job as blameless and upright is accurate. And then we go into chapter 2, and Job loses his health, and his wife tells him to curse God, and his 3 friends show up, and they show up to bring comfort because they are just beside themselves with grief that their friend is going through such a difficult time. And they sit, and in chapter 2, which sort of ends the end of the first section, chapter 2 ends, and again it says that, in all this Job did not curse God. And so here we are ending the first section, and we're thinking, all right, very strange kind of back and forth, but God puts his faith, if you will, if we could use that expression, puts his faith in Job, and Job has come through. And then we get into chapter 3, and we get into the second section of Job, the debate of ideas, the back and forth, the meat of this book, and where we really begin to peel back the layers and begin to get insight, begin to understand what the author was trying to accomplish with this book. And so this debate of ideas is really around, why do bad things happen to good people? And so the first thing that we hear from Job to kick off the second section, to kick off chapter 3, the debate between Job and his 3 friends, Job opens his mouth after a week of silence and curses the day that he was born. And really believes that he would have been better off having never been born. And Job goes through a series of ups and downs, if you will, or back and forths, in the second section where Job is ultimately questioning God and going so far as to demand that God present himself and explain itself, that God needs to be accountable. And Job's friends don't take lightly to Job's response, and so we get from Job's friends, Zophar, Bildad, and Eliphaz, we get kind of the gambit of reaction and responses. Eliphaz tries to be more empathetic and compassionate in the beginning, but ultimately makes the point that innocent people aren't punished from his perspective. And so therefore, again, without it ever being stated, therefore Job must be guilty of something. Bildad takes the approach of trying to be more subtle in the beginning. Job, you're probably better off if you would just repent, acknowledge that God is God and that you have fallen. And then Bildad eventually goes on the point to say, look, none of us are righteous. There's no righteous man. And so repent and beg for forgiveness. And Zophar just doesn't want to fool up with any of them and has no patience for Job. And Zophar goes so far as to say that Job was getting off light, that Job was worthy of even greater punishment and affliction, that he would dare question God. And so we have sort of the range of kind of approaches, the range of interpretations with this notion. And so section 2 ends with Job kind of wrapping up his case and his final statement to the court, if you will. We continue that theme. His final statement is that he maintains his innocence, that I did nothing wrong. I am not worthy of this affliction. I'm not worthy of this pain. I don't deserve any of this, and should be cleared of all charges. In 31, chapter 31, the final portion, he makes the same point about valuing his wealth, that if he put his wealth above God, then he would deserve the punishment. But he didn't. That Job did not put his wealth, he did not put anything above God. He had always held God first. But he's just unsure as to why he's in so much pain, why he deserves so much pain. And verse 40 ends with the words of Job are ended. And then chapter 32 kicks off section 3. And so that's what we're going to discuss tonight as we wrap up this final section of Job, as we wrap up this 3-week series on Job. And so Job ends, section 3 begins with the introduction of this fourth, we'll loosely call him a fourth friend. We're not sure the nature of the relationship of this character, Elihu, but this character was not introduced previously with the three friends. In fact, the author was quite clear that Job's three friends, whether it's his three only friends or his three closest or what have you, but these three friends appeared, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And then this character Elihu just is sort of presented in chapter 32. And Elihu represents a fourth perspective. I think one that gets us closer to gaining some insight, maybe beginning to get our arms around the question, our arms around the paradox, the conundrum. Why do bad things happen to good people? And Elihu starts off by kind of coming to Job's aid and saying, look, you were supposed to be his friends. You were supposed to bring him comfort. You were supposed to be with him, and you did not. And in fact, the three of you failed in substantiating your cases against him. That you maintain that Job must be guilty of something, but not one of you has presented any hard evidence. Not one of you has brought forth anything convincing or substantive to demonstrate or prove Job's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And so Job, feeling, as you can imagine, quite vindicated by this stranger, by this Elihu. And I don't know if he was a stranger to Job or not. I say that just because the Bible chose not to contextualize the nature of their relationship. But clearly there's some connection, there's some affiliation that he would know Job has gone through what he's gone through and would feel comfortable enough to arrive while Job is in the midst of this conversation with his friends. And so you can imagine that Job is feeling quite vindicated, quite justified. And Elihu then turns on Job and says, essentially, you have no business. Job, you have no business, you have no right. And Elihu then goes on to make several points, one of which I think is actually quite interesting. If we look at Job 33 and we look at verses 14 through 20, Elihu says something interesting. For God speaks in one way and in two, though man does not perceive it, in a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on men while they slumber on their beds, then they open the ears of men, or then he, God, opens the ears of men and terrifies them with warnings, that he may turn man aside from his deed and conceal pride from a man. He keeps back his soul from the pit, his life from the perishing by the sword. Man is also rebuked with pain on his bed and with continual strife in his bones, so that his life loathes bread and his appetite the choicest food. So I think this is very interesting. Elihu opens the door for this explanation, for this alternative view that perhaps we hadn't considered before, and that is that God speaks to mankind in a variety of ways, one of which is through dreams, and so suffering may be a way that God communicates with mankind. And I think Elihu actually comes the closest. I think when we read through, and Elihu has got the longest uninterrupted speech in all of Job. So Job doesn't even speak uninterrupted as long as Elihu speaks. Cumulatively, certainly Job speaks the most in the book. But in terms of single kind of uninterrupted running narrative, Elihu wins. He gets 6 chapters. Elihu gets 6 chapters of uninterrupted talking. He starts at chapter 32 and he finishes in chapter 37, where we get the introduction of kind of the final key character in this story. And so Elihu tries to accomplish quite a bit in what he's the approach that he's taking. Ultimately, his perspective is that God's got a reason. There is a reason. There is a reason for it all. And everything that happens, there is some sort of cosmic reason. There is an explanation. And so we may not understand it, but there is an explanation. And that is his major contention with Job, is that Job feels that he's entitled to an explanation, that he deserves, that he would understand an explanation, because from Job's perspective, he's done nothing to deserve. And I think that that's really important, that we continue to come back to this issue. And I think the issue really does lie in the question itself. Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, who decides what's a bad thing? Who decides what's a good person? And what has happened, right? I wasn't doing anything. I was minding my business, and a drunk driver popped the curb, and I'm paralyzed. What did I do to deserve that? What could I have done to avoid that? And so it does. The question does have this intonation, this understanding of that we're almost a very passive actor in our own lives. That tragedy that befalls. What do you do? What do you do when a hurricane comes through and tears the roof off of your home? What do you do when an earthquake shakes the ground beneath your feet and a fissure opens up and your child falls into the earth? What do you do when a tsunami comes on shore and drowns and drags away your family and every earthly possession that you have? What do you do in those instances where you really do feel as if you had no options? What could Job have done to prevent a wind from heaven blowing down his son's home, where his son and his siblings, the rest of Job's children, were feasting together? And as the Bible describes, a wind from heaven came and blew down the house and trapped and killed everyone inside. What could have been done to prevent that? Could Job have invited them to his home for dinner? Could they have met at another sibling's home for that feast? What could have been done? And I think that's I want to get back to the text, but I think it's very important, and this is why we have Bible study, that we can take some time and sort of do these thought experiments and take some time and really kind of peel back these issues. I think it is important to acknowledge, to see, to recognize that inherent in the question, why do bad things happen, underline, happen to good people, is because there is a sense in those moments that the good person, the innocent person, the undeserving person was helpless, that there was a dearth of options, a lack of options, and nothing to be done. And yet we don't ever ask the question, why do bad things happen to bad people? Because there is almost this intuition, this sense, right, that it is a cosmic setting of the balance, that you do bad, bad will happen. And so if a bad person has family members that are trapped in a home that catches fire and everyone and everything is lost in the fire, we don't consider the lives that were lost. We just look at the bad person and say, well, that's sowing and reaping, right? That's the chickens coming home to roost, and whatever expression you want to use. Why do bad things happen to bad people? Because they do bad things. And so we just have this sense that you do bad, bad will happen to you. If you do good, good will happen to you. If you do good, you should not experience bad. And if you do bad, you aren't entitled to experience good. And yet we know and see that all life is full of all of those occurrences. Life is full of all of those instances of good experiencing good, bad experiencing bad, and every combination thereof. And so Elihu really makes the point in his speech, 6-chapter long speech, that God is majestic, that God is mighty, that God is great, that God is omnipotent and beyond our comprehension. That God does not make mistakes. And Matthew Henry says something very interesting. Matthew Henry says he charges Job, that is Elihu, with some more indecent expressions that he had dropped from him. He undertakes to convince him that he had spoken amiss by showing very fully God's incontestable justice, number 1, his sovereign dominion, 2, his almighty power, 3, his omniscience, 4, his severity against sinners, 5, his overruling providence, 6. So Matthew Henry is making the point that Elihu is making this point to Job. He teaches him what he should say, and then lastly, he leaves the matter to Job's own conscience and concludes with a sharp reproof of him that his peevishness and discontent, all this Job not only bore patiently, but took kindly, because he saw that Elihu meant well. So Job is taking all this in, which I think is also important and significant in and of itself. But again, Elihu is not wrong in outlining these things, that God's justice is contestable, that God does have sovereign dominion. He's almighty and all-powerful and omniscient. God it can be very severe against sinners, and God has overruling providence. The world is God's, which is what makes the final conversation, if you will, the final exchange in the book so very powerful. In chapter 38, we get an introduction to the final character, the most pivotal character, and that's God. And God shows up in chapter 38, and God just lays in. God just lays in. And I did this Sunday, and I think it's actually worth doing again, or worth looking at again. God shows up in 38, and God is really not really not trying to hear it. God shows up, and God gets right to it. And I think that it is interesting. I think it's insightful that I don't know what we expected. I don't know if we thought that God would speak or show up. I think for me, I will be candid. For me, I think I might have expected a bit more tolerance, perhaps. We don't get a lot of that. Look what happens, and again, I read this Sunday, but I think it's worth reading again just to really appreciate the context with which God offers his response. Chapter 38, verse 1, Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? I mean, he's just, boy, you don't know what you're talking about. And what's interesting, I think, God is sort of addressing Job here, but I think God is addressing everyone. I think God is addressing Job and the 4 other individuals. I think God is addressing Job, Elihu, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. I think God is, who are all of these individuals that claim to have wisdom about me? That claim to know anything about me and what it means to be God. Dress for action like a man. Verse 3, I will question you, and you make it known to me. You spent all this time asking me questions, Job. I got some questions for you. And then just basically goes on this. You have heard me, if you were able to watch Sunday, whether you watched it live or you were able to check out the rebroadcast, and then just, God goes through his virtual tour of the universe. Who shut the sea in this, verse 8, or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band. Verse 18, have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Declare if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And where is the place of darkness, that you may take it to its territory, and that you may discern the path to its home? You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great. Being sarcastic here. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or have you seen the storehouses of hail? Verse 31, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, or loose the cords of Orion? Those are constellations. And so, he's just verse 33, do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you establish their rule on earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that a flood of waters may cover you? He's just, clearly Job is incapable of even comprehending all this. But God, and that's the point. And that's the key point here. And as we start to bring Bible study to a close, we wrap up the podcast for this week and wrap up this series on Job. That really is the point, So, God then goes on more in chapter 39. Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calves of the does? Can you number the months that they fulfill and know the time when they give birth, and when they crouch bring forth their offspring and are delivered of their young? The young ones become strong. They grow up in the open. They go out and they do not return to them. And so some of these questions, now we can actually answer some of these questions now, right? Because people have observed. People have dedicated time and resources to observing animals in the wild, to understanding migration patterns and mating seasons, and and conception, and how long it takes for an animal's calfling to form and to be born. And so we do understand more of those things, but certainly we don't have a complete knowledge, extensive knowledge. Do you, verse 19, chapter 39, do you give the horse its might? Do you clothe his neck with a mane? Do you make him leap like the locust? His majestic snorting is terrifying. His paws in the valley, and exalts in his strength. He goes out to meet the weapons. And so on and such forth. So in chapter 40, Job kind of responds. And what's interesting is, in Job's response, he doesn't apologize. He just acknowledges that God is right, that Job doesn't have a clue. Chapter 40, verse 3, then Job answered the Lord, and he said, behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer twice, but I will proceed no further. You're right, Lord. I don't have any answer to any of these questions. Can't answer any of them. And so God gets right back to it. Verse 6, chapter 40, the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. And just continues to go on, and just, with just more of his divine creation. And the point that I made Sunday was a point that I heard on the Bible Project podcast on some work that they had done in the book of Job. And they brought up the point that is very interesting. John Collins, I think, was reading a blog where an astrophysicist was talking about kind of galaxies and just the size of galaxies and how many galaxies there are out there. And I think the point that I was making Sunday is if you are a believer of scientists and science, and I am, I believe scientists, I believe science. I don't know. I'm not ready to accept all of it, but science certainly has its place. And I acknowledge that science is a part of the wisdom of humanity, the wisdom of mankind. All wisdom comes from God. So I don't think that that God and science are unreconcilable opposites. Quite the opposite, actually. I think science is a way that helps us to understand, acknowledge, and appreciate God. And so to that point, scientists have developed calculations and we've gotten what we believe to be pictures and images from satellites that are able to take pictures, just at great distances. I'm not ready to say light years, but light years away. Just great distances. They're able to take pictures and do recordings. And so with that being said, scientists tell us that there are events that are taking place in other collections of planets, in other galaxies. That there's activity that's happening right in our solar system that human beings likely will never experience. There are things happening on Jupiter. There are things happening on Saturn, Neptune right now that a human being will likely never observe or experience for themselves. And they're happening because our God is a creative and magnificent and powerful God and just does it. There's a section right here where God talks about the rain falling in the desert and mankind is not there to experience it. Because that's just what God does. And so for Job to question God as to the tragedy that's befallen him, God's response is, you wouldn't be able to comprehend it. You could not comprehend all that it takes to run all of creation. You cannot possibly understand what it takes to run the universe, to order all that happens, because there's things that happened that are beyond your frame of reference, beyond your ability to comprehend. You don't have the language, you don't have the senses, you don't have the foundation, you don't have the capacity. And so who are you to question me? You can't barely understand the world in which you inhabit. And there are worlds upon worlds upon worlds where there are events and occurrences and activity that are taking place that you'll never see, understand, comprehend. And you're to question me. And then so the book ends, in chapter 42, God kind of softens his approach and reaffirms Job, and Job acknowledges his smallness. Chapter 42, verse 1, then Job answered the Lord, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Here I will speak, I will question you, and make it known to me. I had heard of you by hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. And so finally, Job does say, I'm sorry. And Job acknowledges, I had no clue. I thought that I could understand. I have no clue. And so the Lord gets at his friends. Chapter 42, verse 7, and the Lord had spoken these words to Job. The Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my anger burns against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. So Job does get some vindication there, in that he never accused God of wickedness. Job's premise was that God acted in a way that put Job in a position to receive that which he did not deserve. And that was kind of the point that Job was making. I don't deserve any of this. And then God basically shows up and is like, you don't know what you do or don't deserve. You cannot understand. You cannot comprehend what it takes to order the universe. And so there are things that you will perceive as being unjust, unkind, unfair, undeserving. And what I'm here to tell you is that your perception is limited. Because I, God, am limitless. And I am responsible for the ordering of the entirety of all creation. And so what are we left with? What are we left with this book? And so, we sort of get kind of a happy ending of sorts. Chapter 42 ends with the Lord restoring Job's fortune. He gets, and more than that, right? He gets more property, he gets more livestock, more material possessions. He gets remarried. He has more children. And so there is sort of this, that sort of double for your trouble and all that prosperity preaching that comes out of this. If you just hang in there and wait on the Lord, all of that. At midnight and turn it around. Stay true, stay faithful. Yeah. All of that. And that's not at all what's happening here. That's not at all. Job did not earn the quote unquote reward that he got back. Because yes, it's great. I'm certain that Job was grateful to receive the material possessions. I'm certain Job was grateful for a new family. But the new family can't replace the old family. He had relationships with those children. He loved his children. He made sacrifices on behalf of his children every day because he wanted to be sure that they were covered. He loved his children. And they were killed all at once. And so just because he had more kids, we think that the hurt and the loss from his original children is abated? No, of course it's not. Of course it's not. You're not going to replace one child by having others. You feel that loss that stays with you. And so the material possessions and the new family, I think those things were wonderful, and I'm certain that Job was grateful. But Job wasn't rewarded for enduring that loss. Job wasn't rewarded because he didn't curse God. Job didn't get double for his trouble. God blessed Job with those things because that's what God chose to do, because that was part of the plan, part of the ordering of creation. And if God chose not to do those things, and if Job died alone and covered in sores, that would be because that's what was required for the ordering of the universe. Charles, what are you saying? Do we just accept? Yes. I know you want it to be more complicated, and after, the nice thing about Scripture is that you can continue to go back, right? And we can continue to study and read and push and question, and so I encourage you, I empower you to do the research, to read Job, to pray and meditate on this work, on this narrative, and come back with me if you have a different thought. But my thought on this is we don't have the tools. We don't have the capacity to understand why everything happens as it happens. What we need to acknowledge is that people in creation have agency. People and creation have agency. People have choice. So someone decided one day that they were going to take a bunch of automatic weapons and ammo and rent a hotel room in Las Vegas and shoot out of a window out of a crowd of concert goers. We had family at that concert. We had family that was at that event, and it was by God's grace they were spared. Many others were not. Well, why didn't God step in? Why didn't God? Because that individual chose to do that. That individual chose, through their own agency, to act in that way. Well, but God intervenes here and there, and God intervenes, and so why? Why would God intervene over here and not intervene over there? Why would this happen here? Why? We don't have the capacity. We don't have the tools. We don't have the context. We don't have the language. We don't have the frame of reference to begin to understand it. So you're left with this question, and this is the question that I've had going on social media this week. If you're a person of faith, why? Why are you a person of faith? Are you a person of faith because you want to believe that you'll get double for your trouble? You want to believe that at the end of all this, there's some great reward waiting for you in this life and the life to come. And so you're a person of faith because you are holding on to the notion that if you do it right, there's something great waiting for you on the other side. And if that is your approach, then I certainly leave you to that. Are you a person of faith because it's just easier? It's just easier to say, oh yeah, no, God did it. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to, examine it. You don't have to process it. It just, for you, it's easy. It's the simplest explanation. Oh yeah, God did it, and you just move on. Are you a person of faith because you recognize and acknowledge that with all the incredible advancements and gains and wisdom and knowledge of mankind, of humanity, there's still so much more we don't know that we likely will never be able to explain, and that knowledge of a divine creator that is ordered and orchestrating it all brings you great comfort and peace. And that alone is sufficient. And that's where I find myself, that there is an opportunity for us to experience the immaterial dimension, that heavenly dimension, that other dimension, while here on earth, through Christ. I'm a person of faith because I believe that there is more to existence than the plane in which we experience that existence right now. I believe there is another plane, there's another dimension of existence. And Jesus provides a way for us to access that, even right here and right now. And I think what Job was wrestling with was understanding that there was more happening, and he just didn't have the words. He couldn't process it. Are you a person of faith? And if so, why? Family, I want to thank you again for tuning into another Connected podcast, the weekly Bible study of Connected Church. MyConnectedChurch.com is our website. Please share this. Please rate, review, share. Don't keep this to yourself. Let somebody else have an opportunity to experience this Bible study and engage them in conversation. Get their thoughts on it. Ask your friends, ask your family member, are they a person, are they people of faith? And if so, why? I appreciate you so much family. You are kind and generous with your time and your support. Continue to hold my family and I up in your prayers. Continue to hold Connected Church up in your prayers as we stay faithful and dutiful to the calling with which we've been called and try to build this digital church. God bless you all. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay in this fight. Take care, fam.